Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're in the C-130J and we're going to be doing an instrument approach and landing. That means approaching a runway and landing on that runway in very limited visual conditions. For our run here, we're actually going to have good visual conditions, and that's purely because it's going to make it much easier for me to explain what we're doing if we can see ourselves in relation to the runway. But what we're going to do is going to be identical for low visibility. And the great thing about this aircraft is I'm not actually going to touch the controls of the aircraft at all until the last 10 seconds of landing. Everything is going to be done automatically, just like in a modern airliner. In terms of what navigation we're going to be using a TACAN station, tactical air navigation. We're going to be using a VOR coupled with an ILS instrument landing system, and we're going to be using our inertial navigation system a bit. It's kind of difficult for me to make these videos, viewers, because what I explain depends on how much you already know, and I don't know how much you know, so I'm going to assume that you know very little, and we're going to cover as much as I possibly can, but I'll do it as quickly as I possibly can. So, let's start. We're in our C-130, we're about 9,500 feet. We're heading this direction here towards this base here, which is what we're landing at. It's called Cobuletti. It has a TACAN station on it and a VOR/ILS, and we'll go through all of that if you don't understand, so don't worry. Our current situation is we have inertial navigation waypoints set on that base there. So already we're navigating towards that base there, but that's no good. Getting to the base is not good enough. We need to approach it in the correct direction, at the correct altitude and the correct speed, which is what today's all about, because of course we won't be able to see the runway theoretically. So we're starting about 25 nautical miles away. The first thing we want to do is theoretically plot the radial of the runway. That is simply the direction of the runway extended to at least 10 miles in that direction, and that's going to be that blue dotted line, and that's purely here for your visual representation. Next, we need to find a way of getting to that radial, and that's going to be our red line here. This is going to be our heading intercept to intercept the radial. So we're going to program our aircraft to fly down this red line to intercept the radial, then fly along the radial, down the glide slope all the way to the end of the runway, and we'll only take command of the aircraft about 10 seconds before we actually land. As I said, the autopilot is going to fly all of the rest. So let's get started. As ever, we start with our CNI, our main computer system. We need to set up the radio navigations. So we're going to go to NavTune. NavTune, we have 6 navigation radios we can use. VOR 1.2, TACAN 1.2, ADF 1.2. Let's quickly explain what these are. They're different types of radio-based navigation. VOR, very high frequency omnidirectional ranging. This technology can give us a direction to this radio station. It can also give us a course to this radio station, and if it has DME, distance measuring equipment, it can give us the range to that station. Then we have TACAN, tactical air navigation, usually for the military. It works quite similar. It will navigate you to a TACAN radio emitter. It can either give you just a direction to it, or it can give you a direction and a range, and because it's tactical air navigation, it can be placed on an airplane, so you can navigate to an airplane as well as a ground station. ADF, automatic direction finding, the oldest technology here, will allow you to, in its most basic form, find a direction to an ADF station. If it has a type of DME, distance measuring equipment, it can also give you a range to it as well. Now that's very simplified. In real life and in the sim, it's very normal to have amalgamations. So you can mix and match these types of stations together and include other technologies. So let me explain. A VOR, a VOR, could be mixed with a TACAN station, giving you a VOR-TAC station. There are plenty of those in DCS. A VOR could be mixed with an ILS. In fact, we're going to see that today. We're going to see a VOR ILS. An ADF can be mixed with other types of navigation, so you just have to understand all these different types of navigation for it to make sense. So first, we want to set up our TACAN. How do we get the TACAN? How do we even know that there's a TACAN station at the airport? Well, as ever in DCS, there's different ways of doing this. One way is to pop on here, which you can all do by pressing F10, find the base you want to land at, click on it, and you can see all the different stuff it's got. It doesn't have a VOR in this case. It kind of technically does, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. It does have a TACAN. You can see its code is 67 X-ray, and its Morse identifier is Kilo Bravo Lima. Take a note also that we do have an ILS as well on runway 07, and it will be 111.50, Morse identifier India Kilo Bravo. Well, what if I wanted to do it a different way? Press left, control and Charlie. We can get our checklist up, go to nav aids, I want to find a TACAN, and you can see there it is, KBL. So that's the identifier for the station, KBL. That's the universal identifier for the airfield. It's a TACAN and it's on channel 67 X-ray. So let's type that in. Let's get started. 67 X-ray, and I want it in TACAN radio 1. There's 2 TACAN radios, okay? I want to go ident, so put it in ident. It's picked up KBL channel 67 X-ray. Now be careful, this is a radio-based system. All of these are radio-based systems. Things like line of sight, things like range play a part in whether you can actually hook up to it. So if you can't hook up to it, are you too far away? Is there a mountain in the way? In real life, it can be even more complex. Is your aerial, is your antenna being blocked by your own wing or something? It can be complex. Regards the TACAN, is it powered on or off? Obviously, we want it on, and it's on. Do we want it in receive or transmit receive mode? Receive mode is one-way communications, which means we can only get a direction to it. Transmit receive means that it's omnidirectional, and we can get a range to it as well. We obviously want a range. Is it ground-based or is it an air-to-air TACAN station? Obviously it's ground-based. Pairing, Poosh, can you describe pairing, please?
The VOR station can be paired with a TACAN station, and what this does is if you tune in the VOR, and they're called vortex, if you tune in a VOR that's associated with a TACAN, it will automatically activate the TACAN and give you distance information.
Obviously you've got a test here and we don't want to test it, and I should say we're lucky that we've got Poosh here because he literally used to do this for a living, so he can kind of hold my hand. Back to nav index. Now this is interesting. All I've done is type in the TACAN, and it's got the TACAN information. You can see distance, you can see bearing, you can see the channel, you can see the identifier, but look, it's also populated VOR1, and that's because it knows, it's an intelligent system, it knows that that airfield also has an ILS. ILS in this case is going to be part of VOR, VOR ILS, as we were talking about amalgams earlier on. It's automatically put it on VOR radio 1, so it's great, it's done it for me. Most planes, it doesn't have that tech, you have to type in the ILS separately, manually. By the way, if we wanted to type it in manually, you could, do it like that, and you could type it in the same way, frequency 111.50 as we saw before. As we saw before, it's India Kilo Bravo, and the frequency we've got there. So we've successfully hooked up to the TACAN station at the airfield and the VOR ILS at the airfield. Let's quickly talk about what these can do for us. The TACAN, because we've got transmit receive, we can find a direction to that TACAN station or to the airfield and the distance to it. It's very useful. VOR ILS, we can do similar but more. We can find the distance to the ILS station, which is essentially the end of the runway. As well as that, we can find the direction to it. More importantly, it'll also give us our glide slope and our localiser. A localiser means essentially left and right guidance down the radial of the runway. The glide slope means in terms of elevation, it will give us vertical or elevation information down the glide slope so that we intercept the end of the runway, the threshold of the runway, at the right angle or at the right attitude, or guide us all the way down. So that's the difference between ILS and TACAN capability here. In the game, that's enough. We know that works. In real life, we have to have safety and checks and measures. So we go over here, we're going to check that we've hooked onto the right stations. So VOR radio 1 we've hooked in, okay? Right click to pop it out, popped out, mouse scroll to turn it on. You hear that beeping? That's simple Morse code, because encoded in the radio message from the station is the Morse code. What does that Morse code mean? Means, well, as a pilot, you need to know Morse code, basically, and what that means is Morse for India Kilo Bravo. It's a way of making sure that you're on the right station. That's very important, isn't it, Poosh? Have you got any stories about that?
In the United States, there are people that have private airstrips with their own private navigation, and they will turn them off. And I was up in Alaska, we had gentlemen with 5 passengers trying to shoot an approach into one of these private airstrips. The owner of the radio heard them above him, thought they were trying to come in, so he turned it off. And because they weren't monitoring, they were following the wrong course guidance, ended up crashing and killing everybody.
Okay, we're going to put that back, pop that back in. We've double checked them, we're happy with them, they're not going to change. Remember, in the game, everything just magically works, you don't have to worry too much about it. Information, let's check information next. We've hooked into our TACAN and our ILS, so let's go and check it's there. So we want our PFD up, which is going to be our primary instrument, usually on HDD1, which is this guy here. We've got our nav block on our PFD here. shows that TACAN radio 1, TACAN radio 2, TACAN radio 1 is obviously tuned in at 67 X-ray channel, correct. KBL check, so more checks we're doing there. Distance 24.9 nautical miles. We can see the pointer pointing towards it here in our compass rose on our PFD. It's pointing in that direction. That is actually wrong. We believe it's a bug with the game at the moment. It's obviously early access we've got in here. It should be pointing that way. How do we know? Well, we know we're pointing towards the runway at the moment because that's where I set my waypoint. Currently we're being guided by our iNav waypoint, okay? So we can ignore the position of that for the moment. Out of interest, we have our iNav, our inertial navigation waypoint information here. That's our iNav block, currently at that course and that distance. So you can see that matches that. Hard. Next, we can see our TACAN nav block here. It's KBL, obviously. It's a bearing of 031 degrees magnetic. Remember, aircraft work in magnetic rather than true. It's important to understand. And it's 24.9 nautical miles. And it's got a rose pointer, and this time it's working. So this rose pointer works, okay? Out of interest, we've got our iNav data block down here. Inertial navigation, we can see is, well, it's the same as we saw before, 032. Ever so slightly strangely different to that there by 1 degree and 0.1 nautical miles. Why is that? Well, because the TACAN station is not exactly at the same place as where I put that waypoint 1. Next, I need to come out here. We need to set our primary method of navigation from iNav, which is what it is now, to one of our 2 radio-based navigation systems, TACAN or VOR. We can do either TACAN or VOR. They will both work. But the VOR ILS is better because it gives us the extra glide slope and localiser, which is what I said before. So let's get on that. You can do this different ways. This is the way I'm going to do it. Main menu, nav select. Currently we've got iNav selected. I want to go to VOR. Alright, we'll change. So let's see what difference that makes. Main navigation block is now ILS 1, ILS radio 1. It's that frequency there which we've checked. Is that distance there? Note, it's half a mile different to the TACAN station. Why is that? Well, simply because airfields are so big. That the TACAN, that's the TACAN station there. The VOR ILS will be that guy there.
That's not right. What you pointed at there was the glide slope antenna. The VOR, the ILS is actually at the end, other right-hand end of the runway. So right to the right of your pointer, that's the ILS.
Oh, right. Oh, there you go, viewers. Corrected by someone who knows what they're actually talking about. It also shows our course here, viewers. That is the actual course of our runway. Let's just quickly explain that. A heading is where my aircraft is going. So my current heading is there. A course, otherwise known as a track, which in this case will make the radial, would be that line there. That is not where my aircraft is going, but that is the course or the track that I want to follow. Currently it's 354. Why is it that? It's just a default that it was set up with, and it's irrelevant, so it's currently wrong, but we'll come back to that. Checking our HUD, we can see that our iNav data block, nav block has been replaced with our ILS with that frequency and that distance there. We can also notice that we have CDI information because we have programmed in a course, although it's actually the wrong course, but we'll come back to that. We have CDI, course deviation indicator. If there's a course, then we are a certain deviation from that course, and we can see that there. The course that it's telling us to get on is that direction there, and we need to go left to get onto it. That's repeated down in the PFD. The course, set as 354, is that direction there, bearing in mind that we're currently heading in that direction there, and we need to move left, because it's deviated left here, to get onto that course. However, like I said, the current course is wrong, so let's go and fix that. So what course does the runway want to be on? Well, there's different ways, just like everything we've done so far. There's various ways of doing it. You could, for instance, go here, get that tool there and measure it. We've got 2 numbers there, a magnetic and a true. Remember, true almost never matches magnetic, depending where you are in the country and the time you exist. It's 064 because aeroplanes work in magnetic. So we could type that in, but let's do other checks. Another way is we could do our left control and C. We could go to nav, we could go to ILS. We can find our runway, so our airfield is UG5X, runway 07, and you can see there, heading 064, this is what that says there, so magnetic, remember, aeroplanes are magnetic. That's it, well, let's go in and program that. So back course knob there, turn it, watch the PFD, watch it change, wrong way, 064. You must get this accurate if you don't want to crash. All that's changed is our CDI, that is the course that we want to get on. the radial of the runway, and we want to move left to get onto it, and it's dynamic. It will move depending on our direction and our displacement. Next, we've done our course, but we need to tell the aeroplane how high the runway is from mean sea level. And it's not hugely important here because it practically is sea level, but what if you were landing in Afghanistan at 5,000 feet? What about Push's example in Alaska when he's landing at several thousand feet above mean sea level? It's so important to get all this stuff right. So we've got to find it out, and of course there's various ways of doing it. I could probably do it in here. Yeah, look, you can see the top left. It says 59 feet above MSL, mean sea level, which means the average sea level. Or, for instance, we could go to our kneeboard. Let's try that. Right control and kilo. We could zoom through to try and find our runway, which always takes forever. No, it's right there. Elevation 59 feet, yeah, above mean sea level. All right. So the way we're going to do that is set our minimums up, and we're going to go to minimums here on our reference panel. So what this means in this case is we're going to set a decision altitude. That is a altitude above the runway, not above sea level. Well, technically it is actually above sea level, but for what we care about, it's above the runway. At which point, you remember I said we're flying most of this on autopilot, and then the last 10 seconds I'm flying it by yoke. That is a decision point. At some point I have to cut the autopilot off and do the final landing. So we're going to make a decision point. We're going to make it quite low today because we've got, we're in easy mode. We're going to make it 200 feet. So let's get that to 200 feet. But remember, the airfield is 60 feet above mean sea level. So we're actually going to want it 260. So 260 above mean sea level, and we've got our barometric altitude set to mean sea level at the moment. That's where our decision point is, okay? As well as that, you need safeties, checks and balances. What if I've made an error? What if I've read the wrong chart? What if I've set my QNH wrong? All stuff that I could do wrong. Check and balances is you have a radio altimeter. Some people call it a radar altimeter, which is not subject to errors. So we set that. A warning, at which point this is all something you do every time you land. Set it up to whatever your preference is. In this case, it doesn't really matter. Say 200 feet. So in case I've done something seriously wrong, I can't see, at 200 feet, radar, radio, it warns me something's gone wrong. Take control of the aircraft, pull up. Back to IAS. That essentially is our aircraft set up. So what we want to do now is actually start doing the flying. In fact, there's a little bit more that I need to look at. I've missed a glide slope. Remember we talked about the ILS can give us glide slope for the last, well, roughly about 10 miles, but that's not technically true. Currently I've got a flag for GS glide slope saying that in my current parameters I could not pick up that glide slope. I can also see here, regards to my ILS, no glide slope. I cannot pick up my glide slope. That will disappear when I am in parameters or in the box to pick up the glide slope. Finally, there's one thing I haven't set up, which is, you remember I said we needed to fly a heading, which is that red line, to get to the radial. I need to tell it how I want to do that. Do I want to go there to get it? Do I want to go there to get it? Well, the answer is I want to go at a sensible angle. So it's not I'm not approaching too steep to the radial, so the computer doesn't have to do too much work to turn onto it, but also above 10 miles away from the runway. So that there is 13 miles away from the runway roughly. So I want to follow it to there. You can see a heading there of 0005 magnetic. Let's just say true north between friends. And finally, altitude. This only works if we're at the right altitude in the box when we get to this point here. So how do we know what altitude to be at? Well, the rule of thumb is 300 feet AGL per nautical mile. Well, how far is that? That's 10 nautical miles roughly, times 300 feet, 3,000. I want to be 3,000 feet at that point, which is pretty much sea level. So in that case, I can just say 3,000 above sea level. So I'm going to set my heading bug. So move this guy down here, and you can see it moving on the compass rose. And it's 20, it's 10, it's 000. There. It's now set to true north. All right, I'm ready to fly. I'm going to naturalize my throttle, although the computer is going to be controlling my throttle and my altitude as standard, because that's just how this aeroplane flies on one pulse. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is turn to that heading. So all I do is tell it to go to heading, and it's going to turn to heading. You want to know about these are the director modes. If you want to know about them, I've done a full video of them. They're extremely complicated, but unbelievably useful. I'm going to speed up time because your time is precious. Alright, we are now moving along that heading as desired. Next, altitude. Remember how we do this? We need to choose an altitude to go to. So that scroll wheel there, look at that number changing at the top right of the HUD, and the PFD. 3,000 was what I wanted, wasn't it? Okay. Now we're going to press. Remember, we push and hold pitch sync while I'm moving the yoke down temporarily to go down to a descent rate. A real life descent rate would be 3 degrees for an airliner or a cargo plane, but because I've made this deliberately extra small, so that the video is not too long, I'm going to go down much more aggressively. I'm going to go 10 degrees. I'm going to turn pitch sync off, and down it goes. It's going to drive me down, fly me down to 3,000 feet, ASL in this case, which is close enough because our runway is pretty much at sea level. And down we go. Now remember, in real life, zero visibility. So we are completely reliant on all of these stuff here. But again, it's just so much better for you if you can see what's going on. All right, we're below 5,000, so our radio altimeter is starting to tell us our, if you like, our real, empirical. Okay, it's leveled us off automatically. Let it finish doing its job. Alright, we can turn. Altitude select off, altitude hold will stay on, heading will stay on, auto throttle will stay on, and literally until the bitter end for safety reasons. I'm now going to check where we are. Okay, we're approaching this guy here. Next, before we get on our radial, it's important as an airline pilot to configure our aircraft, or as our cargo pilot to configure our aircraft. That means get to the right speed and get our flaps and our gear. So the right speed is an IAS with this selected here. We're going to go down to 150. Check. I'm going to speed a little time a little bit just to burn some of that speed off, and that'll have to do. Flaps are going to come down. All happening very quickly now. I'm going to pause it now. Now, this is a little bit of a distinction between real life and the game at this point. You see, we're approaching our radial or our selected course at this point. In real life, we could turn our nav director on, which is what is going to try and identify the localiser and the glide slope of this ILS and take us along this radial. We could do that much further. We could do that right up back here if we wanted. In game, it's not quite working perfectly, so it's best to manually hit that approach line and then turn it on, which is why I've kind of left everything a little bit late. It just works better at the moment. That will probably be fixed at some point, which is pretty much now for what we care about. So we're going to unpause. We're going to turn our nav on. We know that our selected nav is our ILS. I'm going to configure the plane. If I haven't, did leave it a bit late, but it's okay. Flaps coming down, flap indicator, 50% flaps, and let me double check. Gear is out. Okay, so the system is now removed the heading director, it's on the nav director. Now we need to check if it's captured. Well, we know it is because it's turning. It wouldn't do it if it wasn't turning, but we can see nav captured. So it's successfully captured the information it needs to fly along that radial. New symbology, glide slope. So we're in the box for the glide slope. It's picked up the glide slope radiation, or radio emission, and we can double check there, glide slope. By this representation here, we are there. The actual glide slope is there in terms of elevation. The glide slope is above us. Is that a problem? No, not really. But as we move forwards towards the runway, that glide slope in relation to us is essentially going to come down. The next button we're going to be pressing is our approach. So far, I've got altitude on, I've got navigation on, and I've got auto throttle on. So the system is controlling my speed, the system is controlling my altitude. Keeping my altitude standard, and it's controlling our left and right in terms of navigation. But what it can't do at the moment is go up and down in relation to the glide slope. I can allow it to do that by pressing the approach. I could do that now, but just for fun, I'm going to wait until we've intercepted the glide slope, which is when that guy matches that guy. Yeah, so just to reiterate, viewers, we hit it now. So approach on. It's now, all that means is it can now go up and down in relation to the beams of radiation coming out from the ILS back there. It's going to do some little wiggling and stuff. Push, would you like to talk about how it does it, or how it feels it does it in relation to a real airliner?
It's a little bit more aggressive. So if I were flying this airplane and had these kind of indications, I would think there was something wrong with my system. But this is just the way DCS is set up. In a real airplane, once you go to approach mode, it will tend to dampen and smooth out these corrections.
Viewers, what I've done is I've put to 130, which is going to be my final speed. I've put my flaps all the way down. It's going to cause the system a little bit of grief as it tries to compensate for it, but it needs to be done. So landing, flaps fully down. Remember, apart from the tiny override of yoke, I haven't touched my yoke yet. Everything has been flown autopilot. Now, if your autopilot didn't work, viewers, or you were doing a training and you didn't want to use autopilot, which you usually would do, you could do all this manually. You've got everything you need here. You've got your glide slope indication there and in there. You've got your left and right indication, lateral indication there for your CDI. You've got all of your altitudes and stuff and whatnot. It's just much more difficult. Why not just let the system do it for you, right? So that's what we're doing today. Glide slope's captured. I'm sorry if I missed that earlier on. So we're in the box for the glide slope, and we've picked up the beam of radiation from the guy that Poosh pointed out earlier. Note how it's going left and right a lot. It's because it needs to do what it needs to do to get A, on the course, and B, in the right direction of the course, which if you've flown this manually, is extremely difficult to do. If I was doing this in a Hornet, or if I was doing this in an F-16 or something, it's very difficult to do. So that's why it's struggling and doing everything. When we're within a certain range view, you can see a representation of the runway, which a lot of modern jets do. All modern jets do nowadays. It's relatively easy for it to work out how to do that. It knows the radial, it knows where it is due to the ILS, so it can do that. And obviously, bear in mind, we wouldn't be able to see it. It's good. It's going to get some perfect radial, and this is why I deliberately waited all the way until we'd intercepted that approach pretty much before I turned the nav mode on. It gives us a much better solution, and that's our solution. If you do it too early, it actually comes in at this sort of angle, like that, and it makes it much harder for you and more dangerous for you. Now, as a pilot, I've got to think danger, danger, danger. Constantly checking my altitude, make sure speed, make sure nothing's wrong there. Also comparing my barometric altitude and my radar altitude. What if there's a hill here? My barometric will have no idea there's a hill here. My radar will. What if I've got the level of the runway wrong, or my QNH is wrong, or whatever, QFE is wrong? Got to compare this and that and make sure that everything makes sense. That's it. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to get to our... I'm going to pause it here because this is going to happen quite quickly. We're going to get to our decision height. That is the point at which we need to make a decision if it's safe to land or not. If it's safe to land, it would mean that we can see the runway visually with our eyes. It means that the aircraft is configured. It means that the aircraft is at the right aspect, it is the right attitude, everything looks right, and the autopilot hasn't messed something up. If one of those things is not true, then it's not safe to land, and then we would do a go around, which is not what we're going to do today. In this case, we can see everything's perfect, so we don't need to worry about it. So once we hit that decision and we make the decision to go, the first thing we're going to do is to disconnect our autopilot, which we're going to do with that button there. Press it once to do it, press it twice to shut the lady up, and then our auto throttle, we're not going to take off until literally we're landing. That's really important. Poosh, can you describe why that is?
So in the real airplane, when you have the auto throttle on, the throttles actually physically move. So when you turn the auto throttle off, that's where the throttles are supposed to be. And unless you have some sort of force feedback throttles, the throttles could be in any position. So that when you turn it off, you could have too much power, not enough power. It complicates the landing. So my personal technique is not to turn it off until I'm right over the end of the runway.
Roger, viewers, you can see it's the plane struggling a bit. That's because I've been pausing and pausing. It hates pausing. It doesn't understand what happens when a pause happens. Strangely, a human has exactly the same problem when pausing. It messes the mind up. Anyway, so it is what it is. So look at our altitude. Pause. We've reached our decision altitude there. It's telling us am I safe to land? Yeah, it's fine, isn't it? So let's take the autopilot off. Press it twice. We're at our minimum. Don't take the auto throttle off yet. Wait for that. Because exactly what's the Poosh said, there could be a problem with it. I'm flying with eyes now. And now auto throttle off. I'm safe to come down on the throttle, down to idle. Actually reverse. Hope for God I've configured the plane. I'm sure I have. I can live with that, landing, viewers. And because one of the reasons I was happy to do this without actual IFR condition, bad visual conditions, is because it doesn't matter. The plane was flying it. Whatever the conditions were, the plane would fly itself exactly the same. I only do the last 10 seconds. And that's it. We can go do exactly the same thing now with bad conditions. So that showed hooking up to a TACAN station, using it to navigate to where we need to navigate to, using the heading bug to navigate to intercept a radial, programming that radial in on an amalgam VOR ILS, intercepting that glide slope and localiser, having the system travel that localiser and glide slope to the last 260 feet, which everything was set up, and then doing a manual landing. And I found that thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you for Poosh. Anything to add?
Send your application into British Airways.
Do that right now, and bye-bye.